Socialism is on the rise, especially among those under 30. I came across a new Gallup poll that asked, would some form of socialism be a good thing or a bad thing for the country as a whole? 43% of Americans believe socialism is a good thing. I hear all the time that a new and improved socialism will work in America. It will be a kind and gentle socialism with democratic inclusiveness, social justice, and equality for all. What concerns me is that to achieve the aims of any form of socialism, the government must have more control over your life. No one can deny that individual freedom must be limited in favor of the socialist collective. This means the socialist revolution must move the country step by step away from freedom and toward becoming a more centralized, a more totalitarian state. I think the real question for the utopian dreamers who want more socialism is, how can an ordinary person like myself make America a more totalitarian state? This may sound absurd, but I think it holds some truth, and I will tell you why in this video.
Dancing fearless.
I found 4 ways that you can support totalitarianism in a Jordan Peterson interview. I also am including quotes from Rudolf Steiner, and at the end of the video, Jordan Peterson will add some clarity. The first way an ordinary person can make America more totalitarian is to become a tyrant. Jordan Peterson explains.
You know, you saw the same thing with Solzhenitsyn's description of the gulags because they were run in large part by the inmates. But I think that that's a really good metaphor for totalitarian states in general, you know, because we like to think that a totalitarian state is made up of innocent, oppressed individuals who are under the thumb of an evil tyrant, and that all of the catastrophes are cascading from the top down. But I don't think that that's true. I think that it's more like a holographic structure where the tyranny exists at every single level. So it exists psychologically, and it exists within the family, and it exists within the mid-level organizations.
One way to increase tyranny is to join other socialists and communists by becoming a member of Antifa. Antifa shows up at speaker events, rallies, and demonstrations to shut down free assembly and free speech with violence.
Here is a video filmed by a reporter there. It appears to show a group of anti-fascist protesters beating a right-wing demonstrator. 6 people were injured, 13 arrests were made. Here's Caleb Mopin with more than from Berkeley.
One grouping that is widely present is the folks who call themselves Antifa. Some of them also would call themselves the Black Bloc. People with masks over their faces, helmets, goggles. They're here for a fight almost. I mean, they give that impression.
Another way to be a tyrant is to enforce political correctness in your family, in schools, and where you work. Political correctness is the practical application of Marxist doctrine. It views the world as a struggle between the oppressor and the oppressed. Cultural Marxists have taken over universities. They threaten free speech in 80% of UK universities.
Last summer, University College London's Nietzsche Club put posters around the university asking if there was too much political correctness. Well, they never got to answer that question because they were barred from holding their meetings here.
Tyrants impose political correctness as a way to limit allowable language. By controlling language, you limit concepts that pose a threat to the regime, such as individuality, self-expression, and reason. The most difficult people to oppress will be the ethical individualists. They will strongly resist any imposed authority. An energetic effort is being made to shake off every kind of authority. Nothing is accepted as valid unless it springs from the roots of individuality. Everything which hinders the individual in the full development of his powers is thrust aside. The second way ordinary people can make America more totalitarian is to become an informant.
Well, in Eastern Germany, for example, 1 out of every 3 people was a government informer. So what that meant is if you had a family of 6 people, that 2 of them you couldn't trust. And you can't just say that that's a consequence of the top-down structure. A tyranny is something that exists everywhere simultaneously once it gets a grip.
A totalitarian state is only as strong as its informants. Informants are needed to report wrong thought, which today is called hate speech. Everywhere today, the authoritarians urge you to do your duty and report so-called hate speech. A large network of informants is needed to keep the population in a constant state of fear and anxiety. Accusing someone of hate speech is an effective weapon for the tyrant. It not only is an attack on a person's right to free speech, it can result in a person being deplatformed off the internet, lose their credit card, lose their job, and even be arrested. To silence dissent, stoolies are needed who are willing to report their neighbors to the authorities at Google, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Accusations of hate speech delegitimize and demonize an opponent's view. When someone opposes affirmative action, accuse them of being a racist. If someone hires a man over a woman, they are a misogynist. Criticism of Israel means you are an anti-Semite. It's a brilliant strategy to give tyrannical power to ordinary people. But don't expect an ethical individualist to join the outrage mob of informants. The ethical individualist does not turn his back on his neighbor. Only the morally unfree person who blindly obeys natural instincts or the commands of duty turns his back on a neighbor if he does not obey the same instincts and the same commands as himself. To live and to let live is the fundamental principle of a free human being. His power of conceiving ideas will tell him how he should act in a particular situation. The third way ordinary people can make America more totalitarian is to obey tyrants.
It was ordinary people, in some sense, that produced the catastrophes of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union and Maoist China. I mean, they might not have originated it, but they certainly had the option to say no at different steps along the way, and they didn't, and these things do happen one horrible thing at a time. And like each time they accepted the requirement of doing one horrific thing, the probability that they would accept the next requirement increased. But it's ordinary people who participate in these things, and that's a very, very terrifying thought.
Unflinching obedience to tyrants requires conditioning ordinary people in a step-by-step process. Doing your duty as an informant is a good first step. Those willing to be a rat and betray their neighbor will do almost anything asked of them by authorities. But there remain nonconformists who reject the concept of duty and refuse to obey establishment norms. The ideal held by the ethical individualist is to remain true to yourself and to only obey yourself. The concept of duty excludes freedom because it does not recognize the right of individuality, but demands that the individual conform to general norms. Freedom of action is conceivable only from the standpoint of ethical individualism. The fourth way ordinary people can make America more totalitarian is to do evil.
And it's easy for people to say things like, well, I was just following orders. And, I'm not trying to put myself in a position where I'm claiming that if I was in that position, I wouldn't have followed orders in the same way. I mean, God only knows till you get there, right? That's for sure. But But what that did to me was focus my attention more and more on the necessity of individual responsibility. I thought if it was individuals in the final analysis who were responsible for the great evils of the 20th century, which I think is a reasonable way of conceptualizing it, then it might be individuals who could be responsible for whatever good there might be in mankind that could help us avoid those situations in the future.
By embracing identity politics, we are told that society will be fair. All we need to do is redistribute the wealth and replace the merit system with equal outcome based on race and gender. This is the promise of cultural Marxism that Jordan Peterson says threatens the bedrock of Western civilization. We are in a culture war, and cultural Marxism is winning. It has the support of the universities, the tech giants, the Democrat Party, Hollywood, and the establishment media. But the real consequences of a Marxist victory will only be known in the future. At some point in the future, the individuals who support cultural Marxism today will find out if they are responsible for good or a great evil. Do your research, and before you decide which side to support, be sure. For myself, I am not ready to give up the Western values of individual rights, free speech, free association, and the presumption of innocence. Ethical individualists will not be fooled into giving up individual liberty for the delusion of the socialist utopia. We are human in the fullest sense only insofar as we are free. The purpose of Rudolf Steiner's philosophy of freedom is to lay the foundation of ethical individualism and to show how freedom can become a real driving force in human action, social life, and political life. In this final clip, Jordan Peterson makes it clear why he chose a side in the culture war and how you can use a group's ideology to project into the future and see where that ideology will take us.
And I don't care if they choose to be addressed by those pronouns, whatever. That's up to them and whoever else they can convince or ask or entreat or negotiate with. Fine. As soon as it's law, that's a whole different story. Okay, so now I have to use a certain terminology. So then I look at the derivation of the terminology. I say, oh, that's terminology generated by the postmodern neo-Marxists. Oh, well, I think those people are reprehensibly murderous. So guess what? I'm not going to say their words, period, because I know what they're like. I know where that leads. Okay, so...
But Son, most people think that that's a gigantic step to go from saying you don't want to say Z or Zer or any of these made-up gender pronouns to these are murderous people.
Mm-hmm. The ideology is murderous.
The ideology being Marxism.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jesus, how much proof of that do you need?
Right, but that's most people don't understand Marxism. Like when you're saying this, like when you were so adamant about it, I had to start reading about it myself, and I had to start doing a lot of research about it myself. And I think most people hear Marxism and they think socialism.
Yeah.
They think pooling all your money together, making things more even for people.
Yeah, like they are in Venezuela. Everybody has an equal chance to starve to death. So you know how the Venezuelan government solved the problem of kids starving to death in hospitals?
How?
They made it illegal for the doctors to report starvation as the cause of death. Right.
Wow.
That's Venezuela in a nutshell. Yeah, everyone's equal there. They all have the same number of bones to gnaw on.
Yeah, that's a horrible thing. But
yeah, it's a horrible thing.
Undeniably. But there's no, like, the connection between gender pronouns and murder. Mm-hmm. It's a big leap.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Well, that's why you have to look at the underlying ideology, and you think, well, what is the level at which these things should be addressed? Well, is it economic? Is it political?
Or is it the
personal?
beginnings of this ideology, and you understand where the roadmap leads?
Yeah.
You understand the X at the end of the road.
Yeah, right, absolutely. Well, and I think that's why I recommended to people continually to read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. And what Solzhenitsyn did was say, look, this wasn't a consequence of the Marxist system gone wrong. This was a consequence of the Marxist system. It was an inevitable consequence of the axioms of the Marxist system. And then he lays that out. And it's, well, I think he got it right.
And what is that
why he won the
connection?
Nobel Prize.
But what is the connection?
How much tyranny you have to impose in order to produce something like equality of outcome. And Thomas Sowell's talked about this a little bit too. He said, what the people who are agitating for equality of outcome don't understand is that you have to cede so much power to the authorities, to the government, in order to ensure equality of outcome, that a tyranny is inevitable. And that's right.